Hello, this is a 1987 Johnson 40 horsepower. This is a VRO engine, but you notice we have a fuel pump. That's because I went ahead and replaced all the fuel system. We have rebuilt carburetors, we have new fuel lines, our fuel manifold has been reused and reinstalled, and we have a fuel pump and whole new everything. So this video, I'm going to show you how I did all that. I had other repairs to do on this motor, so I took the power head off. So let's start this video with the power head removed, and I'll show you how I did everything. Alright, with the power head off, it is pretty easy to get to everything. If you're watching this video to do your carbs, don't pull the power head off. There's no need to. I am doing this with the power head off because I already took it off. If you watched my other videos, you probably already know that. So I'm pulling all of the 5/16 bolts off of the front cover. It should be all of them. Special little hardware, so you don't want to lose any of them. There's our front cover and what used to be a gasket still in here. Screws in the cover. Set the cover somewhere safe. Now we have our VRO pump here and our fuel lines. Fuel lines aren't too bad on this thing, surprisingly. I'm gonna cut the zip ties off. You want to be careful around this fuel manifold. You do not want to break these things. That is the absolute worst thing you could do. So our zip ties mostly off. Come in here with the razor blade. Just do a little slice down the hose a couple of times. You don't want to slice in the manifold like I just did. You want to just slice the hose open. Usually that makes it so you can get the hose off without breaking any of the sensitive nylon stuff below it. Once you got a little slice on it, the hose usually falls right off. But since they've been on there under pressure for so long, when the hose starts to degrade, it kind of becomes part of the manifold itself. Get off there. So I'm just going to cut the hose about. Oh, there it goes. Alright, so that disconnects the VRO pump from the rest of the thing. I think in, oil, and then out is all disconnected. I'm going to disconnect the electrical connector. Now, this VRO pump isn't going back on here. I'm going to run a traditional fuel pump. If you're curious, which you probably are, pulling the 5/16 screws off the front cover. There's a gasket back there. So when you're ordering your parts, you want to keep that in mind. There is a hose down here on the bottom of the cover, which runs to the bottom of the intake manifold. And you see it? No, you cannot. Anywho, that hose has got to come off, either from the intake manifold itself or from the lower cover. It should just slip off. However, this one's not moving whatsoever. We also have our pulse limiter hose here, which is holding it on. Now you can see the hose I'm talking about. This is usually a brass nipple, so it's not just gonna fall apart. So you put a little more pressure on it. That gets our front cover off, as well as our VRO pump. So the top carburetor is already, line is already cut. I'm going to slice the primer line up top. These are usually also brass. They're a little stronger, but you still want to slice the hose. So like that fitting is slightly bent down. We'll make sure that it's clear, but it's still a notable thing, they're fragile. Let's pop off the clip here. On this model, the bends are at the bottom, so keep that in mind. Looks like 2 1/2-inch nuts are holding our carburetor on. You don't want to force this wrench up against the carburetor body, because the way it's, egg shaped, if it barely fits there as you rotate, that little thing is going to put a dent into your carburetor, putting a hole in it. Just the design of the wrench, so we want to keep that in mind. I don't see that too often, but it does happen. Carburetor is already loose. Those are nuts. I don't see an adjustable slow speed needle. Oh, so those are big carburetors. They almost look like they're a 50 than a 40. There we go. Gasket looks okay, so it's good. Get a screwdriver. Hose clamp on here still, or zip tie. Put that off. We'll slice the hose. Their carburetor. So back to loosening these screws. I'm going to use the back side of my screwdriver. What I'm doing is hitting that bolt, trying to get the bolt to break free. But it's not really going. So that sometimes works, but it won't here. And we can get our bowl off. So, pretty nice float. Bowl inside is pretty clean. So as I was saying, the carburetor is pretty clean. We have a decent float. It's not corroded inside, so I don't think we're having any issues with these carburetors. I'm going to take these screws, put them in the bowl, and get my clean bucket of carb cleaner. Basket. Alright, so I'm going to put the things in there. Usually I don't do this, but I'm going to do it this time. Take the screw out. This is the drain plug / access to the lower jet. Evinrude makes a lower jet screwdriver that fits inside of there and allows you to remove the lower jet. This is the main jet. The idle jet is inside of there. And that jet you can see through, so it wasn't plugged up. But it's out. Clean it anyway. Might as well take the float off. Needle looks good. Set it back here in case we have issues with our new kit. So usually I use a chisel to get this off because it's huge, it's flat, and it fits the entire point. But it's not in my drawer. The only thing I use it for is this, so I don't know where it went. So I'm going to try the flathead. It grabs, but it doesn't grab the whole way. And it's pretty easy to slip off and strip this off, so I usually don't like using the flathead. I like the chisel. So that's off. We have a gasket right there that can go. Put it in the bucket. Let's put our carburetor parts in here. And our entire carburetor. If you have and are reading a service manual, it's going to tell you in there, not to use this stuff. But you got to remember, the EPA is different now than it was in the 70s, when this stuff would just instantly dissolve aluminum. So it's perfectly fine in there. Now, if you leave it in there for 2 weeks, yeah, you're going to start to have problems with your aluminum. But I give it a good 4 hours in there, and usually they come out pretty nice. The reason I do the top carburetor first is in case I have a problem with this gasket and I need to scrape it off, nothing falls into the bottom hole. You can't use a wire wheel here because you can't get anything inside of here. So it's pretty much just razor blade and scraping. Now luckily, these gaskets, unlike the powerhead gasket, they come off a little more frequently, so they're usually not baked on there for 20 years. So usually, if they don't fall right off, which most of the time they will, a simple razor blade isn't really too hard. It only takes a few minutes. Alright, it's been like 4 hours or so it's probably time to get these out of here. Do the main car body first. Try to get as much of this gunkus out of there as I can. Put it on my desk, because now it'll be self-cleaning. I'm going to use normal carb cleaner here to wash off the cleaning solution. So, I just had a straw, there it is. So now I'll just do the same thing to the rest of the parts. Cleaning off my bench after a couple of sprays. That's how it gets all nice and clean right there. Alright, got the carburetor here. We've got a service manual to check the float and drop settings. And that's all I really need. However, I forgot to bring a razor blade. Got some scissors. My pliers. I was working my dad's golf cart and needed to do some grinding to get a snap ring out. So that's what they look like now. So this is a Sierra carburetor kit. The reason I'm buying this is because when I was working on my 60 horsepower outboard, it didn't really go too well. Used Evinrude parts, the new version of them, and everything was just different. it seems like they went with a different manufacturer or placed a bid for somebody else to make their parts, and they went with the absolute cheapest bid because it just wasn't any good. The float itself was so bent up and so cheap looking. I didn't want to use it. The float valve, this guy didn't quite work. It just wasn't very good. Everything about it just left a sour taste in my mouth. So this carburetor kit and that carburetor kit are the same. I said, well, I'm not using the Evinrude one again. Screw that. So that's where we are. Sierras are a little bit different. Such as we don't have a nylon spacer for the carburetor. We have this fiber washer, which granted probably works fine, but I prefer the nylon one just because that's what came out of there. We also don't have a nylon throttle arm. We have a brass one. In the interest of keeping things the same, you can reuse the old parts. I especially don't like the idea of using the brass one here. The reason being, as a kid, my buddy had this Honda Mini Trail. It was a Trail 50, tiny little mini bike, and it had that little arm, and the carburetor was so old and so corroded, and when we went to get a punch to knock the arm off, all it did was blow up the aluminum on the backside of the carburetor. So there's no real corrosion. I wouldn't really have an issue using this. But I don't like the idea of having to get a little punch to get it in and out, especially when the shape of the carb bowl keeps the arm in there for me. I just don't see the need for that, especially given the cost. This probably cost him, $1.50 to make, where this probably cost him, 1/10 of a cent. I don't know why they went with a better, stronger option on a float arm that doesn't need it. I don't know. Anyway, so I installed the float valve seat and the little gasket below it. Their springs for Sierra are a little weaker. So, it goes on there, but it kind of falls off. So what I like to do is bend it back over just a little bit to keep the spring onto the arm for me. Put this in here, the float valve. Slip her on in and put our little arm. Okay, perfect. We look at it vertically and we can see the float is dropping and it's going down. You want the top of this parallel with the float body. Too far. Too much. Not even close. So this is kind of the hard part about this. It's getting that perfect. You can eyeball it, but they also make a little gauge. I'm going to find it. I remember where I put it now. It's a placeholder in the manual. So, again, you could eyeball it or use the gauge. So, according to the gauge, I'm way off on this side because it's not quite square. It's leaning down that way. So, again, you probably could eyeball that. So, that's straight now. Let's try to give the whole thing a slight bend upwards. Getting close. So this is a lot of bending for this. Usually you get it, third try. Maybe because I'm filming it is the reason for my struggles, which, is usually the case. A little low. You can check it sideways too, which I like to do, which will tell you how parallel you are. Which it actually is pretty good. I'm between the notches of the little 25 through 75, which is what you want. See, if I come up just a pinch, I'll be perfect. And that's not easy to do. A pinch is usually too much. So on parallel, looking good there. A little low on one side, which is reflected on there. So I really gotta just bend this corner. Okay, that's done. As you may have known, these carburetor kits cover more models than what you are working on. So we're gonna have a whole bunch of bonus parts. Don't be concerned with that. Put the little gasket, a little immersion tube there as we're supposed to. This gasket on, make sure that that hole there isn't plugged, and that's right how that gasket goes. Float bowl, we remove the high-speed jet. Looks pretty clean. I have a piece of pre-stripped 12-gauge wire here. I like to use that to clean out the inside and the rear. And then make sure there's no loose stuff on the outside. Do a blow test, look through it, may look clean. Put it back in. Screwdriver part number is 317002 in case you want to get yourself one. In theory, you don't need this. You could just get a strand of wire and get in there and clean it out if you think there's an issue. But getting it out isn't a bad idea, probably. Alright, that is in and or seated. The old gasket off of our little drain screw. Find a suitable replacement. Now it is time to install our float chamber and tighten down the screws. They get stuck about halfway. The reason for that is the blue Loctite looking stuff. I think they call it OMC screw lock. So I don't clean the screws or the threads because I don't want to clean that stuff off. So with that still on there, they won't vibrate out or anything. I like to go, you don't want to tighten one screw down at once because you may bend the bowl. So each one just goes a little bit at a time. So you reach the desired torque. Specs of this one would be 24 to 36 inch-pounds. So you're going to have to either get an inch-pound screwdriver or just kind of where you think it would be. It's usually what everybody does. I usually just try to make sure they're all the same tightness and call it good. Alright, now the top half. What you're supposed to do is run a drill through there, pop that plug out, and then when you clean out the inside, and then coat this stuff, I think in sealant M, put it back in there, get a punch and hammer it back flat, which then takes the cone, pushes it flat, seals it in there, and you're good to go. However, as the years have gone on, I've noticed when you open a carburetor that looks like this, it's kind of a waste of time. Because it's pretty clean inside, and all you really need to do is make sure those passages are clean. We got most of the loose stuff out when we soaked it, and soaking it, if something's clogged, soaking it rarely actually unclogs it. But you can go in there with a little wire, open the carb throat up, get in there and just poke through the little holes. It goes right in, you know nothing's clogged or nothing. I think on the 6 horses it has 3 holes. This one it just has 2 slightly larger holes. So I just clean out the holes with a little piece of wire. Call it good. I can blow through it so it's not clogged. So that's fine. We don't have an adjustable needle here on this. that little flat spot. If it was a commercial engine or a newer engine, it would have a little idle speed, fuel adjust, slow speed fuel mixture screw there. This has a fixed, which is fine. So I just clean out the small jet the same way I did the big one, just with little strands of wire. You blow through it, look down through it, and you see through, everything's good. So that is all there is to it. We got a bunch of bonus parts we didn't wind up using. Instructions here give you a float level, kind of a base of what to do. It shows the drop at 3/4 of an inch. Oh, that's to the top. Whatever, but anyway, so that's all you need to do, and I will go do the same thing to the bottom one now. One more thing. The primer fitting here. That's such a small little fitting that, you know, this little strand of copper wire barely fits through the hole. And I think this gets overlooked a lot. But these plug up probably easier than the rest of the jets. So if you want to do something, just run the wire through there and make sure it goes through, and you're done. Alright, so I want to pull the primer assembly off. I forgot to order a rebuild kit for this. Usually what I do is I order a rebuild kit. If it needs it, I do it. If not, then I don't have to order one for the next motor. I used one on the last engine I was working on, so I don't have one currently. Like I said, I just forgot to order one. So we're going to take a look, see if we need to rebuild it at all, clean it. Who knows what these things need. Pretty tight. Those are going to break. Gasket looks okay. Our top cap didn't break. It's pretty stuck in there. But gasket looks fine. Valve looks fine. The plunger is stuck. So it's a good thing we took it apart. So, into the carburetor cleaner bucket for this, and it's lunchtime. Alright, primer has been cleaned, put back together and tested, and we are in good working order. It really looks like somebody used sealant on the cap, and which kind of leaked out into the internal parts and gummed everything up. So, like I said, don't need sealant there. It would have been quite difficult to start this thing with no primer solenoid. Put new fuel lines on, new little primer lines. These aren't Evinrude, these are some mil-spec lines I've been using. Reason being is it's a lot cheaper doing it that way than it is buying the Evinrude line. So I've been buying the Evinrude line, or I've been using this stuff. Been using it for, I don't know, a year or two now. It's giving me no troubles. Doesn't really rot, stays flexible. It's a good line. Just sometimes it can be a little hard to get on. So I measured the old fuel lines and replaced them with that. So the shorter one goes to the bottom quite nicely. It'll never reach the top, so obviously the long one goes up top, short one goes on the bottom. It is a little hard to get those on, so sometimes what I'll do is put a little bit of oil on the, that's not oil, that's carb cleaner. Which probably works. Anyway, just put a little dab of oil on the barb. And usually that helps slide it right on. the top carburetor on now. The reason I didn't do the top is I needed to get to that bottom fitting. Okay, carbs and fuel lines are on. We have that hose left over from the VRO pump. Let's get that off. So that is a little tiny fitting. Looks like a, well, not tiny, pretty stout, but threads and base are pretty tiny. Looks like a 7/16. And then from that fitting, it went to a pulse limiter. So if you are removing the VRO like I am here, you can do it the way the factory would have and put a plug in here, or you can get creative and just plug that hole. Put a hose on it with a Bolt's hose clamp, however you need to do it. I don't know if I personally would do that, but you know, you can. Okay, here is what our plug looks like. Pretty blurry. I bought a couple of them, and this is the last of them. Part number is on here somewhere, 321164. I don't know if that's correct. I thought I had a 0 in it. But when I was looking up the part number and then looked what I had, that was what I had. So I don't know. Don't check on your motor, but that's what I'm putting in there. Got some aviation gasket sealer here. You may not need sealant on the threads here, but I'm putting some on anyway. As long as I own this engine, that plug's never coming back out of there. And if it needs to, that aviation gasket sealer is non-hardening, so in theory it comes right back out. Alright, plug is in. If this was a fuel pump engine, this is where it would be. So that is where we will be putting it. And I get off the strap. Alright, fuel pump is here. This is a new used pump. Part number on this particular one is 438556. I have the gasket and 2 screws. So we'll be putting that on. The VRO pump, that little clamp I took off, that held in the little fuel filter that would be part of the VRO pump. We don't use one here because the fuel pump itself has a little strainer built into it. A lot of people ask me like, hey, why aren't you putting on a filter? And the reason being is because the fuel pump has its own built into it. No reason to start adding stuff that doesn't need to be there. So these are the special fuel line clamps, a little ramp to them. Everybody watches me do this. They always say, hey, why don't you use the special fuel line clamps? It's like, I do, I just don't show you. So I've been trying to make a habit to show you, so you're not wasting your keyboard time. Okay, those are on. The starter goes here, obviously. So I think I'm going to connect everything when the starter's on. Well, I could probably do it now. I don't know. The fuel lines here are a little longer than they probably need to be. They're probably going to get trimmed down quite a bit. Because the start, like I said, the starter's going to be there, so it's going to hug it a little bit, and then the feed line is going to loop down around the starter and going under there. So this will probably get trimmed to there. Those will probably all get cut down, and it'll probably still flop out over here. Put probably do that when the power head's back on. So we've got our fuel pump, fuel lines. Yeah, we're making some progress. If you're working on a motor and you're in a hurry, it's usually a pretty good idea to order a spare clip in case you break one, because you don't want to have to pay shipping again or the week-long downtime of getting a replacement. I have a few different ones, so I don't need to do that anymore. But they break on a whim, so something to consider. That, you know, I think they're like $5-7. That little investment just as a spare might save you a week plus another, you know, $7 shipping. So it's kind of a gamble, but food for thought. All right, got the airbox cover loosely back on with the gasket. I'm gonna slide in the lower little vent tube and slide in the rest of these screws, making sure the gasket goes on as well. Now, when you pull these screws out, you're supposed to use new hardware because the new hardware will be clean with the OMC screw lock on it. So if you don't feel like spending the money on new screws, put some blue Loctite on there. Because in theory, if you lose one of these screws, it may wind up into the carburetor. If that happens, you're in for a world of trouble. With any luck, it just destroys the leafs and doesn't get anything past there. Well, with luck, it doesn't make it back to the carburetor. But if it does, if you're lucky, it only destroys the leaf plates. Now, if I was installing this on the power head, I'd probably put a little bit of sealant on this gasket to hold it in place for me while I put it on. But I'm clearly not, so I won't be doing that, because I'm pretty sure I'll be able to hold it on there. Sometimes you can get away with not replacing these gaskets, but much like the little throttle link adjustment thing, if you can't ramp reusing the gasket, now you're paying shipping again. This thing barely fits in here, and by barely I mean it doesn't at all. What is going on, Evinrude? So it's a pretty good fit all the way around. Also, this is a fiber gasket. The old one was like a cork. So there's that, but it doesn't fit into the channel anymore because this back is a little too thick. So I'm going to go scissor that down. I really think as the years are going to go on, we're going to see more and more faulty factory parts. Just because, I mean, they don't make outboards anymore. There's still a market for parts. So if other manufacturers are making these parts anyway, why not buy them from them and then just rebrand the packaging with their own stuff on it? They get all of the profit without any of the effort. Especially since most of these manufacturers, I'm sure if you buy enough of them, gladly put it in whatever bag you want. So we'll see how this goes as the years go on, but not liking it so far. Which is kind of why most of these parts you've seen me put on this motor so far have been from Sierra. I never used to buy Sierra because there was no reason to. Like a thermostat from Evinrude was $22. Thermostat from Sierra was $29.97. There was no reason to save a few cents and to get an aftermarket part. Now they're cheaper, much. Like the carb kits from Evinrude, I think they're like $40 each. Sierra, they're $22. It's a substantial savings. But also they work arguably better than the factory ones do now. Again, the factory ones aren't factory anymore. But they probably haven't been for a long time either. Mind you, that is solely my opinion. I haven't had enough side-by-side comparisons to really know if that's the case. But from what I've seen so far, I'm kind of leaning towards it being the case. I mean, it's known now that you're wasting your money if you're buying points and stuff from Evinrude, because they just don't work at all. But you can tell too, like the wiring products they sell now, like the power packs and stuff. Those are all just rebranded CDIs. You can just tell by the plugins they use. So that kind of bothered me. Didn't bother me, but I wasn't thrilled by the idea, I guess. So at this point, I want to get the starter on to get the fuel lines finished, but I don't want to put the starter on because I want to be able to see where my shift rod is going. So it's time now to reinstall the power head. It is now time to install the fuel lines. In 1977, the year of this outboard, if you had a VRO pump, such as this one, you got the fuel manifold. If you did not, you got a series of fittings that connected all these together. Fuel manifold was also installed like that. Now in 1989, they no longer had those fittings. You now had the fuel manifold just flipped and then used. So that is the method we are going to be doing here. I have a 3/8, I believe, 5/16, I mean, fuel line. I'm going to route it under the lower mount of the hood pan and then come up over there. Install the fuel fitting so that the bends of the hose kind of follow it naturally. And install a hose clamp. Four of these. Oops. Something's getting old with that little zip tie gun. He used to cut them flush, and it doesn't anymore. I'd buy a new one, but they're like hundreds of dollars, so no. Okay, well, whether or not that one was hundreds of dollars. So since we're not using a lot of the original stuff anymore, we're not going to be using the same length. So these need to get trimmed down a little bit. Hoses are attached. They don't make any tight bends, no folds, no kinks. So that'll be perfect right there. The other side, this side, we will cut right below my fingers. Now, if you use Evinrude hose here, if you use the Evinrude hose here like I am, you're getting 10 years plus out of these fuel hoses. If you use the something off Amazon or wherever else, expect a year. So maybe worth the investment to get the OEM hoses. So that's where that is going to go. Looks pretty good. Doesn't look like it's rattling around. Nice fit. I'm not going to put a hose clamp on the fuel pump side yet, but I am going to hose clamp these three, because if I need to rebuild the fuel pump, like if it doesn't work, I don't want to have to replace this long hose. I can still just slip it off. There's not enough pressure going through here to blow the hose off. Usually you can get the primer bulb and really force it and it'll pop those off, but normal circumstances it's not going to fly off on you, so you don't need to worry about it. So I will hose clamp these down. Okay, let's get the fuel line in situated. It's the same size as this hose, the 5/16. Gonna run it from the top out through the base. The bottom, again for the oil line, You can grinder or hacksaw it off, but I'm just going to put a cap over it, a little rubber cap to finish off the look. Most of the time I would buy one that didn't have the top, but I don't have that weird looking style, so I'll just leave it like that. Now our in is going to be pretty easy to figure out. Give ourselves a little bit more than we need by putting a slight bend in it. Find my razor blade. Need that to cut it. I'm going to take the cap off, inspect the O-ring, which looks brand new, and look at the inside of the cap for cracks, which I see none, so we are probably good. This hose is a little hard to get on, so I'm going to put just a drop of oil on there. Kind of smear it around a little. Yeah. Alright, I'm going to use my snap-on transmission pliers to get this started. Alright, O-ring moved a little, that's fine. We don't want to go crazy tight on this screw. Just kind of snug it up, you know. And aside from the two hose clamps here and down there, which I will do right now, we are done with our fuel system. We'll go start this engine up in a bit in this video and make sure we don't have any leaks and the fuel pump's working. And if so, we'll hose clamp it off and call it done. And yeah, now we're back together, back to where we started from. Now let's go see if this beauty runs. Okay, time to see what we forgot and or messed up. Pumping the fuel. The old primer bulb now. I always do this with the hood off to look for leaks and whatnot. Nothing so far. That is good and hard. No fuel leaks, carburetor's not leaking, hoses aren't leaking, so we are good there. I'll give it just a pinch throttle. A little bit of prime, and let's see what happens. Well, that fired right up. Now we know the engine runs okay and our fuel pump works. We can finish off the final touches. This may have seemed silly to not put these zip ties on first, because you know you're thinking, oh come on, 12 cents, you really don't waste 12 cents. It wasn't the 12 cents, it was the hoses and the ability to easily get to them and replace them, and the cost of the hoses. Now also you can usually tell if you need a fuel pump rebuilt by looking at it, and looking at this one, you didn't need to rebuild it. I'll go give you an example before this video ends. So we have a random fuel pump here. You see inside of it, it's still red. It looks pretty clean down there in that little diaphragm part. You can't see it at all. Who am I kidding? There you go. Nice, clean, shiny red. A little bit of dirt inside. Not bad. Then we look at this one, completely full of dirt. The red thing is completely faded. Hey! The red thing inside is completely faded. This one probably works. This one should get a rebuild kit. This one, nice, good, clean, and red. This one's probably fine too. But if we look, we have three different types here. Tiny little fitting, probably for a 9.9. Big fitting for a larger motor. Two fittings for, let's say, like a 70 horse. So different fuel pumps. But this thing is clean on the inside and the outside. It probably didn't need a rebuild kit. I could have just rolled the dice and put clamps on and it would have been fine. Now, if you got one of these old things from the 70s and early 80s, I would just rebuild it. Wouldn't even mess with it. And kids are loud, huh?